My daughter's diploma was the trophy of my sacrifices, but her words turned that triumph into a curse. When she spat that I wasn't worth the title of father, I took a breath and let her go, rents unpaid, bills ignored, love withdrawn. That wasn't even all of it. What happened next was rather unbelievable. Let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout-out in our next story. Today's special shout-out goes to John Freeman from Miami. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I'm not sure if you've ever looked at a child you love and seen nothing but your own failure staring back. My name's Michael, and I've spent the better part of my life working night shifts at the plant, scraping up overtime pay, and eating cheap takeout so my daughter could have a shot at a life I never dreamed of. I thought love was sacrifice, missed birthdays, late-night runs to the pharmacy when she was sick, holding back the ache in my hands from too many hours spent turning bolts. I thought if I worked hard enough, she'd see me as the reason she could stand on that stage, that she'd look me in the eye and know every step she took was built on the tired bones of her father's back. But that's not how it turned out. When she walked across the stage to collect her diploma, her smile was dazzling, like she was soaking up every beam of light in the room and holding it in her palms. I held my breath, waiting for her eyes to flicker to me, just once, to see me there in the shadows of the audience, the man who carried every bill, every worry, every silent prayer that she'd make it further than I ever could. But her gaze was fixed on the far side of the room, where her friends were shouting her name. And in that moment, I saw how easy it was to rewrite history when the ink of your own ambition is fresh. She took the microphone and started her speech. "I did this on my own," she said, her voice soft but clear. "No one believed in me. I'm here because I refused to let anyone hold me back." And the crowd roared for her, clapping and cheering as though she'd pulled herself out of the dirt with no help at all. I felt the room go silent around me, the blood in my ears thrumming like a war drum. I wanted to stand up and shout that she was wrong, that every late night, every second job, every cracked knuckle was mine and it mattered. But I didn't. I stayed seated, hands folded, heart thudding in my chest like an accusation. She didn't see me, or maybe she didn't want to. Afterward, she found me outside the hall, the mortarboard tucked under her arm like a relic. Her smile was gone, replaced with something harder. "You were never a father to me," she said, her voice low enough that no one else could hear. Her words were small, but they cut through me like a rusted blade, slow, jagged, impossible to ignore. My mouth went dry, but I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just took a breath, let it fill my lungs, and let it go. She turned on her heel and walked away, her tassel swinging like a pendulum marking the end of something I didn't know how to mourn. I stood there for a long time after she left, listening to the distant laughter of graduates and the clink of champagne glasses. It was like the world had decided her version of the story was the only one worth telling, and I was nothing more than a footnote that didn't fit the narrative. I felt a bitter kind of freedom in that moment, a crack in the walls I'd built around myself all these years. I realized I didn't have to keep carrying the weight of her dreams if she refused to see the truth of who I was. And so, I let her go. No calls, no texts, no pleading for her to come back and rewrite the ending. I stopped paying her rent. I stopped answering the phone. The bills she left behind became silent reminders of the choice I'd made, to let her believe I was nothing, even if it killed me inside. You ever been in that kind of silence? The kind that's so deep it feels like it's eating you alive, but at the same time, it's the only thing keeping you from drowning in someone else's noise? That was the silence I chose. And as I stood there in the gathering dusk, the lights of the graduation hall flickering behind me like dying stars, I knew this was the start of something I couldn't name yet. All I knew was that her words had turned my triumph into a curse, and the only way to survive was to let the pieces fall where they may. The first week after she said those words felt like walking through a house that had already been abandoned, even though I was still there. I'd come home to an empty table and a silence that was thick enough to choke on. The mail piled up in the slot, bills, late notices, things she'd once cared about, and I let them sit there, unopened, like little tombstones marking the life we'd shared. I didn't care. Or maybe I cared too much to keep pretending. The fridge was mostly empty, and I started eating peanut butter straight from the jar, just so I wouldn't have to think about cooking for someone who'd already left me in her heart long before she said it out loud. I know how it looks from the outside. A father giving up on his daughter, on the bills, on the house he worked himself raw to keep. But if you've ever felt the air leave your lungs when someone you love tells you you're nothing, you'll understand. There's a kind of grief in realizing you've been holding up someone else's life like a scaffold and they're ready to knock it down with a single sentence. So I let the cracks spread. I stopped fixing the leaky faucet, stopped trimming the hedges. I let the garden go wild because it felt like the only honest thing in my life, something growing out of control, unashamed of the mess it made. She called me a few times in those first weeks, her voice tight with anger I couldn't touch anymore. "Why aren't you paying the rent?" she demanded. "You said you'd help me. You're heartless." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I let her calls go to voicemail until they stopped altogether. Each missed ring another brick in the wall between us. I listened to her messages in the dark, the crackle of her voice like a ghost of everything I used to be to her. And in that quiet, I started to see that maybe I'd never really been her father in the way I thought I was. Maybe I'd just been the man who kept the lights on, the one she could blame when they flickered out. The truth is, I was tired of being her safety net when she'd already cut me loose. I wanted to know what it felt like to have nothing left to lose, to see who I was when the title of father was stripped away. I didn't stop loving her. I just stopped loving the part of me that begged for scraps of her affection. The first time I realized I could breathe without her approval was a shock. A quiet kind of relief that tasted like freedom and guilt all tangled together. I started sitting in the living room at night with the TV off, letting the dark settle around me like a blanket. It was the only time I felt honest with myself, the only time I wasn't pretending to be the man she needed me to be. You ever feel like your house is haunted, not by ghosts, but by the echoes of all the things you thought you'd become? That's what it felt like to live there alone. Her old bedroom still had the string lights she put up when she was 14, the mattress stripped bare like it was waiting for someone else to claim it. I didn't touch it. I didn't pack it up. I let it stay exactly the way she left it, a shrine to the girl she used to be and the man I used to think I was. Every time I passed that doorway, I felt the weight of everything I couldn't fix, but I didn't try to change it. I wanted her to know that if she ever came back, she'd find the truth waiting for her in every cracked wall and dusty shelf. I started spending more time at work, even though there wasn't much to do. The plant was quieter than I remembered, the clatter of machinery a comfort I didn't know I'd been missing. My coworkers asked about her, how she was doing, if she'd found a job yet, and I lied. I told them she was doing great, that she was making her way in the world just like she said she would. I said it with a smile that felt brittle in my mouth, and every time I told that lie, I felt a little stronger. Not because I believed it, but because I was learning how to let go of the need for anyone else to understand. I know now that love doesn't die all at once. It fades like the last light at dusk, slow and silent, until you're standing in the dark and you realize it's never coming back. But there's something holy in that darkness, too. A chance to see yourself without all the noise, to find the edges of who you are when there's no one else to tell you who to be. So I let the bills go unpaid. I let the house grow cold. And in the quiet that followed, I found a piece of myself I thought I'd lost a long time ago, the part that knew how to stand alone, even when it felt like the whole world was waiting for me to fall. The first morning I woke up and didn't think about her was like taking a breath after being underwater too long. The sun was coming through the cracked blinds and thin strips of gold, and for a moment, I just lay there, listening to the house around me, floorboards shifting in the heat, the distant murmur of traffic. No voices, no footsteps, no demands echoing through the walls. Just me and the quiet. It felt wrong at first, like I'd forgotten something important, but then I realized it was the first time in years I didn't feel like I owed anyone my life. I started selling things she left behind. The piano she never played, the stuffed animals from her childhood that used to line her bed like silent witnesses. Each item felt like a memory I'd been keeping alive for her, and as I carried them out to the car, one by one, I felt lighter. There was no ceremony to it, no anger, no grief. Just a quiet understanding that I didn't have to hold on anymore. The pawn shop owner didn't ask why I was selling. He just counted out the bills and gave me a nod, like he could see the story in my eyes without me having to say a word. I took up running in the mornings, a habit I hadn't had since before she was born. My body protested at first, lungs burning and legs stiff, but I kept going, step by step, until the rhythm of my breath drowned out everything else. It wasn't about getting fit or proving something to anyone. It was about feeling the ground under my feet, the air in my chest. About knowing I was still here, still alive, even if I wasn't the father she needed me to be. The more I ran, the more I realized how much of my life had been spent waiting for her to call, waiting for her to come home, waiting for her to say the words I needed to hear. And in that waiting, I'd lost sight of who I was without her. But out there on the empty streets, with the dawn breaking soft and cold around me, I started to find him again. The man who loved without apology, but who knew, finally, that love doesn't mean setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You ever have a moment when you see yourself so clearly it's like meeting a stranger? That's what those mornings felt like. I'd come back to the house, sweat drying on my skin, and I'd see my reflection in the mirror. Older, maybe, but not broken. I stopped shaving every day, let the stubble come in like a sign that I didn't have to be neat and clean for anyone anymore. I started cooking simple meals just for myself, eggs and toast, beans and rice. It wasn't much, but it tasted like freedom. No more takeout containers piled in the sink, no more feeding someone else's expectations. I told myself it was okay to miss her. It was okay to remember the way she used to curl up next to me on the couch when she was small, the way she'd look at me like I was the whole world. Those memories still hurt, but they didn't own me anymore. I let them pass through me like ghosts, thanked them for what they were, and kept going. Every time I thought about calling her, I reminded myself that love didn't have to mean giving her another chance to break me. Sometimes love was just letting go, even if it tore you apart inside. I started sleeping better, too. No more tossing and turning. No more waiting for the phone to ring in the middle of the night. Just quiet. I'd lie there in the dark, breathing slow and steady, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was learning to live with the emptiness, to see it not as a punishment, but as a chance to rebuild from the ground up. I know some people might call that giving up, but to me, it felt like coming home to myself. For too long, I'd let her needs define who I was. I'd measured my worth in the weight of her happiness, in the way her face lit up when she wanted something from me. But now, I was learning to see myself in the small, quiet victories, the mornings I got out of bed without dread, the nights I didn't flinch at the thought of tomorrow. I was learning that I didn't have to be a martyr to be a father, that my love for her could be real and still have boundaries. There's a kind of peace in that. A fragile peace, maybe, but it's real. And as I watched the sun rise on those early runs, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could be whole without her. That my worth wasn't tied to her approval or her forgiveness. That I could be enough for myself, even if I was never enough for her. She came back into my life in the most unceremonious way. A single text message that lit up my phone late one night while I was folding laundry. "We need to talk," she wrote. 5 words that carried the weight of all the years between us, of all the silences I'd let grow like weeds and the cracks of our relationship. I didn't answer right away. I sat there staring at the glow of the screen, feeling my heart stutter in my chest like an old engine turning over. I thought about deleting it, about ignoring her the way she taught me to ignore myself. But I didn't. I let it sit there, a tiny fracture in the peace I'd built for myself. When we finally spoke, it wasn't the tearful reunion I think some part of me still hoped for. She didn't ask how I was, or if I'd been eating or sleeping. She didn't want to know about the running, or the way I'd started cooking for myself again. She wanted money, plain and simple. "I need help," she said, her voice clipped and sharp like she'd rehearsed the words. "I can't make rent, and I know you're still getting that over time." I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to her breathing on the other end, and for a moment I wanted to laugh at how simple it was for her to come back into my life, like nothing had happened, like no words had been said that couldn't be unsaid. I didn't tell her no, but I didn't tell her yes either. I told her I'd think about it, and I could feel the tension in her silence. A kind of impatience that had nothing to do with love, and everything to do with the way she'd always seen me as a safety net she could walk away from, and then come back to when she needed. When we hung up, I sat there in the dark, the folded shirt still warm in my lap, and I realized that something had shifted in me. I didn't feel the same old ache to fix everything for her. I felt something harder, colder, like steel in my spine. The next day, I sent her a check. Small enough to remind her I wasn't a bottomless well, but enough to keep her from falling. I didn't write a note. I didn't tell her I loved her or that I hoped she was okay. I just signed my name, the same way I'd sign any bill or receipt, and mailed it off. It wasn't about the money. It was about drawing a line in the sand. I wasn't her father in the way she wanted me to be anymore, but I also wasn't going to let her drown. Maybe that's the hardest part of loving someone who doesn't see you. You can't help but reach out even when every instinct tells you to let go. She called again a week later, her voice bright with forced cheer. "Thanks for the check, Dad," she said, like it was a favor I'd done for her instead of a lifeline she demanded. I didn't ask her how she was doing, and she didn't offer. We talked about nothing for a few minutes, weather, work, the usual small talk that feels like trying to patch a sinking boat with paper. When we hung up, I felt both relief and exhaustion, like I'd just run a marathon I hadn't trained for. You ever have a conversation that feels like you're both standing on opposite sides of a canyon, shouting across the void? That's what it was like with her. No matter how many words we threw at each other, they never seemed to land. But I kept talking, kept listening, because some part of me still believed there was a bridge somewhere in all that distance. Or maybe I just needed to prove to myself that I could keep caring without letting her break me again. I started sending her small checks every month. No more, no less. It was my way of saying, I'm still here, but I'm not going to let you take everything from me. She didn't thank me. She didn't ask for more. It was a quiet truce between us, a way of acknowledging that we were both too stubborn to let go completely, even if we'd already let go of the parts that mattered most. I didn't tell anyone about those checks. It wasn't about showing the world I was a good father or trying to win her back. It was about me, about proving to myself that I could be kind without being weak, that I could care without disappearing into her shadow. I kept running in the mornings, kept cooking simple meals at night. I let the house stay quiet because I realized that sometimes silence is the only honest thing you can offer someone who's already decided not to hear you. I know it sounds like I'm still holding on, but the truth is, I'm not. I'm letting her go in the only way I know how, by giving just enough to keep her safe, but not enough to keep her close. It's a thin line to walk, but it's the only way I've found to keep my head above water. And in that balance, between love and self-respect, between giving and letting go, I'm starting to find something like peace. Not the kind that comes with reconciliation or forgiveness, but the kind that comes when you finally learn that some silences are worth keeping. It was a Tuesday when she finally showed up at my door, unannounced and carrying the weight of every unpaid debt between us like it was armor. I heard her car pull up in the driveway, the engine idling for a few seconds before shutting off. I waited for the knock, the hollow echo of her fist against the wood, and when it came, I felt something cold settle in my chest. I opened the door, and there she was. My daughter, older than I remembered, the lines of worry etched into her face like a roadmap of all the places we'd failed each other. She didn't wait for me to invite her in. She stepped past me, her eyes scanning the living room like she was taking inventory of everything I'd let fall apart. "This place looks like shit," she said, her voice flat and unimpressed. I didn't bother arguing. I watched her run her fingers along the dusty mantel, her expression tight with something I couldn't name. Maybe disappointment. Maybe just the habit of finding fault in everything I did. I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. I let the silence fill the space between us like a wound. "I'm not here for a handout," she said finally, turning to face me. "I'm here because you owe me." The words were sharp, each one a shard of glass she pressed into my skin. "You said you'd always take care of me. You said you'd be there, no matter what." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the anger and the fear all tangled up in her eyes. "I needed you, and you walked away." I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the kitchen counter. "I didn't walk away," I said quietly. "I stopped carrying what you wouldn't see." My voice was calm, almost gentle, but underneath it was a steel I didn't know I had. I spent years breaking my back so you could stand up there on that stage and tell the world you did it all on your own. I spent nights I can't get back, worrying about whether you'd make it, whether you'd be safe. And when you told me I wasn't your father anymore, I believed you. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop her. I'm not saying this to hurt you, I said. I'm saying it because it's the truth. I loved you enough to let you believe your story, even if it erased me. And maybe that was my mistake, thinking that love was about giving until there was nothing left. I could see the words hitting her, each one sinking in like a stone. But I didn't stop. I needed her to hear it. I'm not here to beg for your forgiveness or to make you see me. I'm here to tell you that I'm done letting you decide who I am. For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but she blinked it back, her jaw set hard. So that's it, she said, her voice cracking just a little. You're just going to stop caring? I shook my head. I'll never stop caring, I said. But I'm done proving it to you in ways that cost me everything. I'll keep sending the checks, because I still love you. But I won't keep tearing myself apart to be the father you want me to be. I can't. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. She looked around the room, her eyes darting to the sagging couch, the cracked paint on the walls. You let this place fall apart, she said softly, almost like she was talking to herself. I let it fall apart because I needed to see what was left when it was just me, I said. And you know what? It's not much, but it's mine. She didn't answer. She just stood there, her shoulders slumping like the weight of it all was finally pressing down on her. And for the first time, I saw her not as the girl I'd raised or the woman who'd turned her back on me, but as someone just as lost as I was. Someone trying to find her own way through the wreckage. She turned to leave then, her eyes shining but her face hard. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't promise to call. She just walked out, the door clicking shut behind her like the final note in a song we'd been playing for too long. I stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of her car driving away, the silence settling over me like a shroud. You ever have a moment when you realize you've said everything you can say, and there's nothing left but the truth? That was that moment. I felt hollow, but I also felt free. Like I'd finally laid down a burden I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. I cleaned up the kitchen after she left, wiping down the counters and washing the dishes she'd looked at with disgust. I didn't do it for her. I did it for me. To remind myself that this house was still mine, even if it was falling apart. That I was still here, still breathing, still capable of starting over. After she left, the house settled into a silence that felt deeper than any emptiness I'd known. It was like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what I would do next. I moved through each room slowly, touching the worn wood of the banister, the cool glass of the picture frame she'd left behind. There were no new messages, no new accusations. Just the stillness of a life I was finally learning to claim for myself. I started small. I painted the living room a pale gray, the color of early morning clouds. It wasn't about covering up the cracks or pretending the past hadn't happened. It was about making the space mine again, one brushstroke at a time. Each swipe of paint felt like an act of reclamation, a way of telling myself that I didn't need anyone's permission to start over. I bought a new lamp, just a simple thing with a soft, warm glow that made the room feel less like a mausoleum and more like a place where I could finally breathe. I stopped waiting for her calls. I stopped checking my phone every time it buzzed, half expecting her name to appear on the screen. The checks I sent her each month became just another line in my budget, no different from the electricity bill or the groceries. I didn't let myself wonder how she spent them. That was her choice, just like this silence was mine. You ever learn that lesson the hard way? That love and rescue aren't the same thing? That's what I was learning every day in that quiet house. On the nights when the emptiness threatened to swallow me, I'd go for long walks. I'd let the cold wind bite at my skin, the sharp air reminding me that I was still alive, still moving forward. I'd pass the old library we used to visit when she was small, the place where she'd tug on my sleeve and beg for one more story, one more book. The memories still hurt, but they didn't own me anymore. I'd let them come and go, like the tide, and in their wake, I found a strange, steady peace. I started writing again, too. Not letters to her. I'd already said everything I could say, but little notes to myself. Reminders that I was more than the sum of my regrets, that I was allowed to want something for myself. I'd write them on scraps of paper and tuck them into the kitchen drawers, like small prayers waiting to be found on days when the silence felt too heavy. They weren't for anyone else. They were just for me. The garden out back turned wild in the months that followed, but I didn't mind. I let the ivy creep up the fence, let the dandelions bloom wherever they wanted. It felt like the land was telling me something, that even in the chaos, there was life, that even in the places we let go, something new could take root. I sat out there most evenings, the sun sinking low behind the trees, and I'd close my eyes and feel the world turn slowly around me. You ever find yourself in a moment so quiet, so complete, that you can't help but believe maybe this is what peace looks like? That's what it felt like in those evenings, with the cool earth under my feet and the weight of the past slowly lifting off my shoulders. I didn't need her to come back. I didn't need her to understand. I just needed to know that I could stand there alone and still feel whole. The last time she called, it was just to say she'd gotten a better job and wouldn't need the checks anymore. Her voice was distant, polite, like she was talking to a stranger. And maybe she was. I wished her well, and she hung up. There was no anger, no tears, just a quiet end to a story that had taken everything from both of us. I put the phone down and sat there for a long time, letting the finality of it settle in my bones. In the end, I didn't find forgiveness or reconciliation. I found something better. I found the strength to let her go without bitterness, to let the memories be what they were without trying to change them. I found the courage to see myself not as the father who failed, but as a man who tried, who loved as fiercely as he could until it broke him, and who learned, at last, to love himself enough to stop breaking. I know now that sometimes the hardest thing isn't holding on, it's letting go. It's standing in the wreckage of everything you built and realizing you're still here, still breathing, still capable of making something new. I'm not the man I was when she walked across that stage, and I'm not the man she needed me to be. But I'm enough for me. And maybe that's all I ever needed to be. If this story felt familiar, if you know the pain of loving someone who can't love you back, then you're not alone. I share stories like this every day, stories that remind us we're stronger than we think. If you'd like to hear more, just hit that subscribe button and join the ones who refuse to give up, no matter how quiet the fight becomes. See you soon in the next story.